Hello, everyone, and welcome to my Life in the Universe pandemic series. So, just a series of short talks about various things to do with life in the universe that I think are interesting, and I hope you might do as well. And like I said before, I think the middle of a pandemic is a good time to think about life in its widest context. So, today I want to talk about a question that seems slightly crazy, but I think is very interesting. Could aliens be made of gas? Now, of course, you and I exchange gases with the environment. We breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide, so that we know that life forms can use gases in various different ways. But what I want to talk about right now is, could you have an alien made only of one state of matter, such as gas? In our own case, we're made up of three major states of matter: gas, liquid, and solid. In fact, you're about 60% liquid, and you've got some solid in there, your skeleton and the membranes of your cells. So you're predominantly liquid with some solid structural support material, and you exchange gases. But the question is, could we have an alien just made of one state of matter, a gaseous life form, or a plasma life form, or a solid life form? And today I want to talk about gaseous life forms and whether that's possible. It turns out people have thought about this before, and one of those people, in fact, probably the earliest speculation about this, was William Whewell, who was an interesting character. He was a Victorian scientist born in the late 18th century. He lived into the 19th century. He was a polymath, a Renaissance man who thought about everything from geology to zoology, botany, philosophy. He coined interesting terms. He even coined the word scientist and physicist. And he also did a citizen science project. He gathered thousands of people around the globe and got them to measure the tides, because he was interested in lunar interactions with the Earth and tidal cycles. In fact, it's attributed as being the world's first citizen science project. He fell off his horse in 1866, and that was the end of that, but not before publishing a wide variety of papers and books, including this one called The Plurality of Worlds, which was his synthesis of his ideas about alien life in the universe. Personally, I think it's an abysmal book, simply because it's full of cherry-picked data. This book is about making an argument that humanity, our civilization, could be the only intelligent civilization in the universe because we are God's special creation, and he tries to give evidence in support of the fact that there could be no other intelligent civilization. Now, I'm not going to get into religion here. It doesn't matter what you think about a God or not. The book is very much taking an idea that we are the only special creation and then using data to support that idea rather than testing the idea itself. So I personally find it offends my sensibilities as a scientist. But nevertheless, it is a wonderful book. And in there is this quite fantastic speculation about gaseous aliens, and it's really worth reading it out. He says, no speculators have been bold enough to place inhabitants in a comet, except indeed some persons who have imagined that such a habitation, carrying its inmates alternately into the close vicinity of the sun's surface and far beyond the orbit of Uranus, and thus exposing them to the fierce extremes of heat and cold, might be the seat of penal inflictions on those who have deserved punishment by acts done in their life on one of the planets. And then he goes on, but even to give coherence to this wild imagination, we must further suppose that the tenants of such prison houses, those still sensible to human suffering from extreme heat and cold, have bodies of the same vaporous and unsubstantial character as the vehicle in which they are thus carried about the system. So here we've got gaseous aliens in prisons on comets in half a paragraph in a book. So this is very much William Whewell, and in fact Victorian England generally. Gaseous aliens in prison ships in, as I say, half a paragraph in a book. Quite impressive, but quite wonderful. But there is a speculation on gaseous aliens. Later on, Fred Hoyle wrote a book. Fred Hoyle, who was a famous astronomer who, among other things, came up with the phrase the Big Bang. It was actually a pejorative word. He didn't think it was the correct theory at the time, but he came up with the phrase nonetheless. But he wrote an interesting book in the late 60s called The Black Cloud. And this is an intelligent interstellar cloud that comes close to the Earth, threatening our environment. Scientists study this cloud and they find it to be very unpredictable. And its unpredictability leads them to believe that it could be a life form, as it turns out to be. So it's an interesting book because it raises again this idea of a life form made of a single state of matter, a gas cloud. The question is, is this plausible? Well, one can certainly think about how such a cloud could work in a physical sense. That's the easy bit to do. So you could imagine, for example, a cloud that contains molecules, and just like electrical signals pass down a neuron in your brain, triggering information and triggering various calculations, maybe molecules moving through a cloud, different types of molecules would mean different things, and those molecules and atoms would carry information, and the cloud would think. These molecules would travel through space very slowly, diffuse very slowly, so the cloud would think very slowly. If I asked you 1 plus 1, you would give me the answer 2 almost instantly. Maybe the gas cloud takes a million years. But hey, who cares? The heat death of the universe is a long way off. Maybe the cloud just takes a very long time to think. You think about what you're going to eat for dinner in a few seconds. Maybe the cloud takes 100 million years to think about what it's going to eat next, but it doesn't matter. So you can come up with all sorts of crazy, but nevertheless, on the surface, physically plausible ways in which some sort of cloud could have informational complexity to think like a brain. That's the easy part, as I say. The bit that's missing from much of science fiction, and indeed anyone else who dreams up these ideas, is how you would get to that end state. So here on the Earth, we have quite discrete lumps of matter, solid and liquid, bound up in a cell membrane. And that turns out to be very good for the process of evolution. Now, evolution is a very simple process. Well, it's not simple, but the principle is quite simple. You've got a lump of matter, it divides in two. Those lumps of matter contain errors, as inevitably happens when things in the universe multiply or are sitting there for a long period of time. You get errors, and those errors produce variation. And that variation is interacted with the outside environment that imposes a selection pressure. Those variations in the material so produced that do well in that environment continue and reproduce again. Those variations that are deleterious, that do not work so well, tend to disappear from the process. So evolution allows you to go from simple things to complex things and many intermediate states in between. And it's important to understand that the process of evolution is not random. Fred Hoyle, again, famously said that it's impossible in a junkyard that a whirlwind going through a junkyard would produce a Boeing 747 from lots of pieces of metal and random pieces of junk being thrown together to make a 747. And he used that argument to question the process of evolution. But the crucial error in that way of thinking is to misunderstand the fact that the source of mutations, of variation in evolution, is random mutations. But the process of evolution is not random in the sense that the environment selects particular variants of that matter that are successful in that particular environment. That is a non-random process. It's a selection process. And in that way, as you generate random lots of matter that has random variations, it is non-randomly selected to fit into particular environments. And in this way, you can go from a simple cell to a complex brain over this long period of time. And that's the uncontroversial basic idea behind the process of evolution that explains how you can go from simplicity to a brain in a few billion years in a way that is not random. So what you have to do is to ask yourself, how could that happen with a cloud? And that's the bit that those who speculate about gaseous life forms have to be able to address. And so far they haven't been able to. You can imagine such a process. Imagine a cloud that divides in two, and part of that cloud drifts off into the galaxy. The other part of the cloud is exposed to radiation from a star, and that radiation generates new molecules, causes mutations, if you like, by producing new types of molecular arrangements, and that represents new information. And maybe that cloud is better now at surviving in a high radiation environment because of that interaction with radiation. And that cloud then splits in two, and part of that cloud goes off somewhere else, and it evolves. And eventually this process of selection in the interstellar clouds results in an intelligent cloud drifting through space. The problem is that physical process really plausible? Do we imagine discrete lumps of cloud breaking off and then moving off and evolving and responding to an environment in such a way that there is some sort of increase and consistent increase in complexity over many generations of the cloud? We can certainly imagine an increase in complexity in a temporary way, in that the radiation from that star increases the complexity of molecules, but does that get passed on to the next cloud? When the cloud moves somewhere else where there isn't radiation, does it continue to carry this information, and so on and so forth? So the real challenge is to think about the process of evolution, not can we think up a cloud that can think, can we think up a mechanism to get from just a random collection of diffuse molecules in the interstellar medium to a thinking cloud. And that's the bit that turns out to be much more difficult to do. Now, of course, we shouldn't be narrow-minded. We should be open-minded to the possibility. It's not to say it's impossible, but it's difficult to imagine a way in which that could occur. And we should also say that we've never observed any evidence that this is occurring in the universe. Now, having said that, we haven't examined every cloud in the known universe, so maybe out there in some particular part of the universe is an intelligent cloud. But certainly when we look out in the interstellar medium, what we see is sort of what we would expect: diffuse clouds of material drifting around, randomly breaking up, some of it being exposed to radiation, some not, different molecular complexities, but no emerging complexity and order that's undergoing a process of selection that we would look at it and say there's a very good chance that in that interstellar cloud that we observe over there, intelligence is going to emerge. No one has proposed such a thing, and no one has proposed a physical mechanism to allow that to happen. So gaseous clouds, gaseous alien prisoners on comets, or intelligent clouds, as in Fred Hoyle's case, drifting into the solar system. I think we should keep an open mind, but at the moment it doesn't seem as plausible as those discrete lumps of material made up of liquids and solids that can split in a way on a planetary surface that allows them to undergo this process of evolution. So it remains an open question as to whether life must be made up of different states of matter mixed together like us, or whether it's possible to make a life form out of a single state of matter. It's a fascinating question. Thanks a lot for joining me.